Assalamu alaikum all. Thanks very much, Sister Rashida, and the Talim Committee for letting me do another Talim. I'm going to start sharing my screen here in a bit. See, that should be coming up. There we go. So everybody can see that, right?
Yes.
Okay. Um, just to do a little bit of a introduction. Some of you might remember I did a Talim on the um, most recent book that I published. That was my Chicago activist life from Ireland to Palestine, 1968 to 2025. Um, I'm just kind of laughing because somehow I thought it would be possible to present more than 55 years of activism in 45 minutes or an hour. So if you weren't on that one, you can kind of imagine how it went. I didn't get very far. So what I'm going to do today is talk about topics from the very end of the book, which covers Muslim activism in Chicago that I was involved in, and a lot of other Muslims and CIOGC and so on. I should also say that there are still copies of my book at Masjid Al-Taqwa. There are some at from uh, Bahar Cultural Center. And they're $20. All of that money goes to either Masjid Taqwa or the Cultural Center for their programs and so on. So if you want more information about some of the things I'm going to be talking about today, you can find a lot of detail in the book itself. Most of what I'm going to go through today is the period of time from about 2015 to 2023. And during a lot of that time, I worked for the communications department at CARE Chicago. And I was editor-in-chief of the Chicago Monitor, that was an online social justice news service. And there were a number of interns that I mentored, and they wrote some articles and that type of thing. But we mainly tried to cover news events that the primary media force services and that weren't covering at all. So I'll certainly give you some examples of those. So most of the information in today's presentation are from articles that I wrote either for the Chicago Monitor, and then some of them are articles I wrote for the Muslim Journal. This is the table of contents. And again, I'm kind of laughing because this is the first page of the table of contents of my book. And I think during the last Talim, maybe we got down to number 7 in topics. I'm not even sure about that. But what we're going to be doing today, and this is the second page, I've highlighted all the various chapters of the book and some of the topics that we're going to cover. In the book, it's this part of the book is arranged according to topic, but I thought in this presentation it would be a lot more helpful to arrange it according to the period of time. So like I said, we're going to start with 2015 and go from there. So the very first topic I want to cover, and this is actually a very important one, is the founding of the American Islamic College. And some of you are aware that Imam Rabbani and myself got our degrees from there. And this description here is from a Muslim Journal article where I talked about the history of the college and its foundation and what happened. So I very specifically picked that title for this article. So it's the Al-Islam community that founds America's first Muslim college. And I think it's a very significant milestone in the community. And you'll kind of see as I go along here, it's one that's paid many dividends and is still training and educating Muslims here in Chicago. So it was originally founded in 1981. And during that period of time, the immigration laws were loosened quite a bit. So they got rid of a lot of the, what do you call them, quotas that they had for various places. So a lot of Muslims from the Middle East, from Africa, from South Asia were able to come to the United States for the first time. And that resulted in the building of a lot of especially a lot of the very large mosques that you see now in Chicago. Like for example, the Islamic Foundation that's near where I live, out in the suburbs, was founded by Pakistani Muslims during this period of time. It's a very large mosque. They have a school there, and so on. The other thing that was interesting during this period of time is that there was a lot of cooperation between African American Muslims in this first generation of Muslims that came here, and one would like to think that that has continued. I think there's been some certainly bumps in the road along the way. I think we're still making some progress on that. But if you think about it, I mean, African American Muslims were the largest Muslim population in the United States. And obviously, they're still um, maybe not the majority, but certainly a very large community. And one of the things that happened is that Muslim immigrants that came from other countries, wanted to communicate and see with the Muslims who were already here what that was all about. So, Imam Muhammad uh, was very involved in the beginning and foundation of the American Islamic College, as I'm sure everybody um, here or everybody listening to this knows that the Imam was very big on having dialogue with other Muslim groups, other religions. And one of the things that drove his desire for having a American Islamic college was at the time most Muslims or Muslim teachers were usually like funded, by a mosque or a masjid somewhere, and they were sent to Egypt and Syria mainly to get their Islamic education. And Imam Muhammad was certainly ahead of his time in saying, we should have this type of education here in the United States. So that kind of led to this idea of establishing an Islamic college. And this quote is from one of the books that uh, combines khutbahs and presentations and talks that Imam W. Muhammad made. And I won't read the quote, but you can understand one of his biggest priorities was education, that was a way to move and have the Ummah progress. So that was a very high priority for him. Um, the second person who was very involved in establishing the American Islamic College is Professor Ismail Faruqi. A lot of people don't know him anymore or maybe don't recognize the name. At the time, he was one of the leading Islamic philosophers and scholars in the world. Um, and you can see how, the various things that he contributed to. He was one of the pioneers in this whole idea of Islamization of knowledge and really articulating very well the concept of Tawhid as a complete worldview. And he was one of the first people to set up a Islamic Studies department. He did that in Temple University. And you can see how many scholarly articles and books that he published. It was also, and which I kind of skipped over, he was also a Palestinian American. And he was born in Palestine during the British Mandate. So both Imam Muhammad and Ismail Faruqi were the two leading forces in establishing the college. The first iteration of the college opened in 1983. Professor Faruqi was the president. Akbar and Jabir Mohammed were some of the founding members of the Board of Trustees. And in 1985, they were the first accredited Muslim college in the United States. And then they had some financial problems that mainly made them close. And then it was finally reopened in the fall of 2013, and that's where you can probably see from this picture I found somewhere that Imam Rabbani and myself were able to go there and get our degrees. And I was just thinking, like, neither of us looks very much older, but anyway, I guess this wasn't too long ago. I want to bring this up at least to communicate what degrees and services that the AIC has brought to Chicago and obviously to the American Muslim Ummah. They offer a bachelor's degree and master's in Islamic studies. They have a chaplaincy program. Now, it's the last 2 points I was very happy to see. These are programs that are now being offered. I believe it's during this summer, where they are offering certificates and it's a whole workshop program and that for teachers in Islamic schools and administration officials. So the way I look at this is Imam Muhammad's vision that is finally completely coming into place. And this is where not only to have Muslims be educated in the Islamic sciences here in the United States, but also teachers who would go off and either teach or administer Islamic schools. So starting with 2015, one of the things that it's important to remember is that um, at that in 2015, Illinois officially designated May 19th as Malcolm X Day. And the reason that happened is by a very well organized campaign by the CIOGC. You can see it was sponsored by the State Senator Jackie Collins. And I remember working on this campaign and doing what I could to help out. But I had lots of doubts about whether the legislature in Illinois would vote for this because I'm thinking, Malcolm X, he's still, controversial or whatever. So I have to say I was pleasantly shocked when it was passed unanimously. There wasn't any issue at all. And you can see from the description in the resolution, not only that, but it was really recognizing Malcolm X as a singular human rights activist. But if you notice, not only one of the most influential Muslim leaders in the country, but African American leaders in history. So that was accomplished by, again, a lot of Muslims in Chicago getting together and pressuring the Illinois State administration to do this. Um, this next one, I would probably say this is when I've been proud to be a Muslim many, many times, but this is one of the times that I was, um, it just felt wonderful. Let's just put it that way. This was a period of time when Black Lives Matter, and hopefully everybody still remembers that, was at its height. This was in 2015, where the main focus of the Black Lives Matter movement was community control of the police. And this particular march, I think it had like 5,000 people in the march. This was one of the first times that the Chicago Muslim community was very visible in the Black Lives Matter movement. And the community actively mobilized for this march. People were talking about it in hutbas, and you can see all the different organizations that were part of this. Um, Obviously, the BLM movement, Fly was a terrific activist group, and the BYP 100, same kind of thing. So a lot of this was led by youth in the community. So at one point, when I wrote this article, one of the things, and this was for the Chicago Monitor, the way, let's say, like the Tribune or sometimes, and some of the local media would just present this protest. Oh, it's another Black Lives Matter protest, and they want to defund the police, and they don't really have any goals. What I pointed out in the article that was complete BS because it was very clear the goal of this march was to get the city council in Chicago to pass a community control of the police ordinance. And in fact, at the time, there was a sample one already written up, but a lot of the media ignored that. Well, you can tell it took a few years, but in 2021, a community control of the police ordinance was passed. And I know a couple years ago or whatever, there were people from the community were being elected to serve on this board. So again, think of this as another very successful project where Muslims came together, no matter what community they were from, and joined with other people in the community to make sure something like this happened. Um, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, Tabassum Halim. He happened to be executive director of the CIOGC at the time, and I really liked what he said here. You can read the quote. He really places the whole idea of being a Muslim in this social justice center, and as anybody who knows me, that's one of my main focus. But him saying it, it is incumbent upon all Muslims to initiate, participate in, and collaborate with any effort that removes oppression and creates an environment that allows all of us to reach our highest potential and live with dignity bestowed upon us by our Creator. I couldn't have said it any better. And this was the message that was sent out to the Muslim community in Chicago, and the good reason that they turned out in large numbers. There was a group that I still work with them, called the Arab American Action Network. And even though the title, you know, sounds like it's mainly Arab Americans, well, that's true. Most of the people in the AAAN are Palestinian. Um, I'd say the majority are Muslim, and there are also black youth from the neighborhood who are also involved in some of their programs. So this particular campaign was run by, as it says, it's a Chicago Arab and Black youth that were focusing on this racial profiling that the FBI were doing. And you can see from the beginning, the first bullet point there, some of the Black Lives Matter folks, like Asada's daughters, were involved in it. Chicago Desi Youth Rising is the Pakistani youth organization, and obviously Care Chicago. And what was happening at this time, you had the FBI, they had policies of racial profiling, and you have to remember too, this was still at the height of people looking for domestic terrorists and so on. And the Chicago Police Department had these things called suspicious activity reports. So they would fill these out. I don't know, let's say they saw typically it was a youth of color, or an Arab, or a black youth, or a Latino youth, or whatever, um, being arrested for something or doing something suspicious they didn't like. And these were very vague. They just, there wasn't any boxes to check. They just had to write down a couple things. Well, the Chicago police would hand these off to the local terrorism program that was in Illinois. Basically saying this person should be investigated. Um, and of course, as the FBI likes to do, they had undercover informants. And then there was this countering violent extremism program I'm going to talk about in a minute. So this was a probably a year-long campaign um, by all these different groups. And the important thing is it was led by Arab and Muslim and Black youth. And actually, it became very effective. They eventually, I think it was WTTW or PBS station, got got involved, and they basically forced the Chicago Police Department to revise these SARs, these suspicious activity reports, and put more information on there. And you just can't hand these things over to the terrorism center. So again, another example in this case of youth from different communities, including Muslims, that were able to have some impact. This is another one in 2016, and you can see from the title here, it was another campaign from different youth groups in Chicago, including, Muslim youth, and you can see it was also Latino and Asian and Arab youth. There was a training conference that was being held outside of Chicago in one of the suburbs. And it was taking these Illinois Tactical Officers Association, basically like the SWAT people, to this conference. And what the conference was supposed to be doing is providing counterterrorism training for the state police and police departments and all that type of thing. And of course, the people they were targeting, as we just saw, were, Black and Muslim and Arab and Asian youth and so on. So it also had a keynote address by this guy called Sebastian Gorka. He was a notorious anti-Muslim bigot, speaker, and author, and he did the keynote. And at the time, he wrote for the Breitbart News Network, and he was Trump's. This is all happening, when Trump is president for the first time. He was Trump's national security advisor. So the people that you see there, some of my good friends, they're all chained together across Michigan Avenue. It took the Chicago police quite a long time to get them disconnected and arrest them. But the most positive thing that this did, it gave a lot of publicity to this, anti-Muslim terrorism training that you knew was going on elsewhere in the country. So now we go back to something that we have again. this was during obviously Trump's first term, and I doubt anybody who's here or watching this on video has forgotten that there was a Muslim ban during the first Trump administration. In this case, and this was common kind of across the country. So this was like the one of the first days the ban was put into effect. Chicago had 3,000 protesters that turned out to the international terminal at O'Hare and basically shut it down. Um, and Care Chicago was very involved in this. A lot of other Muslim groups and the some of the immigrant right groups were all involved. And one of the things that Care Chicago did, and I hope they do this again, they actually provided lawyers. They set up little tables in uh, the terminal, and they did this for a while. Just when people would get off the plane, giving them advice about here's what you can do and here's what you can't do, and that kind of thing. Um, so again, another example of not only Muslims, but joining with other people in the community to stop this, completely illegal, ridiculous ban. Even the one we have now, it's been spread to even non-Muslim countries, but back then it was clearly focused on Muslim majority countries. Um, this was an event. I'm kind of smiling because I found out that one of my favorite people is quoted in my article. But um, during 2017, this was in what used to be called Burma and now is called Myanmar. This was an earlier version of a genocide of Muslims called the Rohingya. And the Rohingya were stateless people in sorry, in Burma, and they were discriminated against, and well, even more than that, the military in Burma, and they were in control of the country, um, killed these people and pushed them out of the country. They said, "Oh, these people are all, they all came in here from Pakistan, and they don't have any rights because they're not really citizens." And the military did a whole number of things about destroying their villages, and these are people that had lived there for hundreds of years. So there was a press conference, and the CIOGC again, and the Burma Task Force was involved. Um, and when I was looking through this, I found a great quote from Imam Tariq here. I am going to read it because I think, again, like I was talking about the other quote during the Black Lives Matter protest, I think the Imam does an excellent job of tying, I'll say, the communities together. Why Muslims from different communities need to come together in this kind of situation. And as a descendant of people taken from their homeland, endured tremendous atrocities for centuries while the world was silent, I am moved by the suffering of other people. I am moved by the silence that exists, that is an affront to humanity. Allah or God gives us an opportunity to come together so we can address those things that are wrong and against what it means to be a human being. And this clearly has echoes of what's happening right now in the genocide of the Palestinians. And all those things are still true. And I think one of the reasons that the Imam Tariq mentioned Allah or God, that there were a number of representatives, ministers, and rabbis, and people from other religious communities that were at this press conference and were supporting this protest about the genocide of the Rohingya. Okay, this is in 2018. There's often been anniversaries of the Palestinian Nakba. And for people who don't know, that was the Nakba is a catastrophe in Arabic. And that's when the apartheid Israel state was formed by killing many, many Palestinians, taking them off of their land, destroying their villages, and pushing them into the West Bank or Gaza or Jordan or whatever. So at that time, this was the 70th anniversary. And at the same time in 2018, there were protests going on against uh, the siege or, well, siege of Gaza. I mean, Gaza, as it is today, is still completely blocked off. No one can get in or out. So that was going on in 2018, and there were a number of marches about people either from Gaza going to the border or outside of Gaza going to the same border and protesting. So you can see there was a number of Muslim organizations that um, sponsored, helped sponsor this protest. AMP is American Muslims for Palestine. They're still a very, very active group. And I think many of you know Abdullah Mitchell, who at the time was the COGC's executive director. And you can see, even at that time, he probably would still say this today, condemning and denouncing the Israeli military, um, in this case, against unarmed Palestinians. And this was also a time when the U.S. Embassy was being moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which again was part of the Trump administration and something that was being protested by certainly by Muslims and other people around the world. So this will probably look very familiar. This is 2019. And at that time, again, during the first Trump administration, there were many, many deportations, not at the same level as there are now, but still, breaking up families and deporting people who were had committed no crimes, that type of thing. And this was one of the largest, I think, protests I'd ever been in. It was in Chicago. It was just huge. And you can tell from the sign, people back then wanted to abolish ICE too. Or as I like to say, my favorite way of serving ICE is crushed. That's what I would like to see happen to ICE. But anyway, so you can see a lot of the Muslim groups that were involved. Care Chicago. This is one of the things that the Illinois Muslim Civic Coalition, which is obviously very, very involved now, was also part of this march. And I just quoted, there were some, in the article, I quoted some Muslim students from Northwestern. I didn't put their names in here. Um, but you can see the things that, this is a woman, you can see that the things that she's talking about, it hits home. A lot of us are children of immigrants and have families dealing with the documentation process. Even though this is a problem happening all over the world, we must do what we can now. The message is still the same. And again, this is another example of the Muslim community and all the different parts of our community coming together with, particularly in this case, with immigrant groups and fighting back against this first version of the deportation plans. So I mentioned a little while ago, and again, remember this was, when Department of Homeland Security was at its height. People were looking to stop domestic terrorism. That was a very big deal. And Department of Homeland Security came up with this countering violent extremism program. And what I called it in the article was the new COINTELPRO for Muslims. So many of you probably remember what COINTELPRO was, but that was the FBI counterintelligence program that surveilled Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, tried to destroy the Black Panthers, and many other organizations. It was a very similar thing. So there was a Stop CVE coalition of many members. There were a lot of different Muslim groups that were part of that coalition. And they created this report, came out of UIC at the time. And what the program was doing was also targeting and criminalizing Muslim and Arab youth, just like I just mentioned a little while ago. And this program had all this phony scientific data, supposedly, about, how terrorism is formed and, you should look for people with beards and I'm not kidding. It was like one of the signs was if suddenly someone became more devoutly Muslim. I mean, that was one of the signs that they had listed in there as, well, you got to watch out for that because that's kind of a sign of somebody who's becoming a terrorist. They had a lot of stuff like that, and they got all this information from um, people that were Islamophobes, and none of it was scientific at all. And what they did is they tried to go out to various mosques and masjids and Muslim communities to give them money to participate in this program. I know the large mosque in DC, not part of our community, but the large Muslim mosque took some money. Actually, out in California, Bayan at the time accepted some money, and then they got embarrassed by a huge fight back program that happened in LA and also some other pilot cities where people just exposed what this was. And so the whole program was a complete failure. None of the Muslim communities would cooperate with it. It was basically wanting you to narc on, people next to you in the masjid. I mean, it's just disgusting. But it was a complete failure. And the last thing I'm going to talk about is, so we can leave some time for questions or comments. This is from, well, the picture at the top is from the very first Chicago Black Muslim History Tour that we did. The one from the bottom is the second one, because I did two articles for the Muslim Journal on our Black Muslim History Tour. And, the first one was back in 2023, and as you all know, it's still going strong. And I thought it would be also a good time to remind ourselves of what some of the people said about the tour and how much they appreciated it. One of the things you can kind of see at the top that I'd say everybody who's gone on the tour has so appreciated having elders from the community who had connections with these various stops um, be able to tell the history of it and what happened to it or what it's doing now and that type of thing. Um, and some of these other comments, people appreciated, like, some of these things were in their neighborhood. So they had a whole new appreciation for the neighborhood they lived in. They learned so much about um, Black Muslim history that they didn't know before. And I really liked the last comment was that this one person was so excited they had come to the tour with many people in their family to experience this. And the fact that they were able to come together as a family, were all able to experience this, Black Muslim history together. And I'm sure they would be communicating that to other people. So I'm going to just stop here because we have a few more minutes for questions. I would just say in general, the summary I would give is that the Chicago Muslim community has been very, very active for a very long time. And when it's been the most effective is when different parts of the community have gotten together and supported each other in solidarity towards some some type of goal, whether it's, community control of the police, stopping the FBI from, or the Chicago Police Department from profiling, you know, communicating about the genocide and of the Rohingya, or now obviously with Palestine. And also part of that activism is also education. So, we started with the American Islamic College, which accepts people from any type of community. And actually, they've been very open to accepting people from the Nation of Islam or the Al-Islam community or from wherever. And that's been, I think, a very positive thing. And obviously, our own masjid has also done its part to keep this important history alive. So that's another thing that I see as um, Muslim activism in Chicago. So I will just stop there and see if anybody has a question or two or comment.
This was very informational, and I really appreciate all of the work that you put in to sharing this, Brother Bill. It
You're
was very
welcome.
eye-opening to just to even know that that much has been going on um, and making history. It's beautiful.
Mhm.
It's beautiful. Thank you for that. Got a hand raised, Imam Tariq.
Assalamu alaikum. I apologize for the background noise. Thank you, Brother Bill. In your estimation, how much or how important has external factors or external pressures been in, I guess, in some of the solidarity that we've seen across the Muslim communities? And in the absence of that, what are your projections on how to maintain that
Uh,
solidarity?
uh, Montreat, what do you mean by pressure? What kind of pressure are you thinking about?
Well, everybody, when we saw the Muslim ban, that was something that got, everybody kind of up in arms, right?
Okay.
So that's an external pressure. And a lot of our activism is in response to external,
Okay.
it's response to external pressure. So
I
that,
got
that's
you.
that's the framing I'm looking at.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, number one, I would say that that's true. All of those events and all that activism I showed was in response to something going on that was major, protests about Black Lives Matter or community control of the police or the Palestinians being killed or the Rohingya. But you also have to remember there were um, some of that was initiated by um, groups themselves, Muslim groups themselves, like the whole focus on what the FBI and the Chicago police were doing with the profiling. So, and what was the other one? There was another one I was thinking about, but well, that even that conference that was going on that was training military, training police in counter, really counter Muslim terrorism. some of these things are a lot of those activities that I just mentioned had been going on for a while. I mean, we know the FBI profiling has been going on forever, or the Palestinians have been attacked for a long time, or um, but it also took some groups that got together in their own coalition or group of activists that said, okay, we need to have something, we need to do something about this. We need to block the road about this and publicize this horrible anti-Muslim police conference that's going on. So I would say both things have happened, that people have reacted to larger larger issues. It used to be I think when I was early on, when I was a Muslim, the only time I would see a large number of Muslims turn out for anything was usually at a Palestine rally. That's why I was so excited to see during the Black Lives Matter period, the the whole Muslim community turned out to support that community control of the police. So the other question I know you had was, what do you think about the future? Well, I think the biggest issue now is there are so many things that I'll just stick with the Muslim community at the moment. There's so many things that are going on now on the Trump administration that affect the entire community that it's almost hard to get people, activists, or whatever to get together and focus on one area or another. So I do see there are some new Muslim. There's a Muslim activists for justice or something. There's a new group that's formed of a bunch very young Muslims and that type of thing, and they're attacking a lot of the immigrant rights, the deportations and stuff like that's going on. So I think there's plenty of pressure to get the community and people across the community to turn out. But what really needs to happen is, yeah, you do need to have specific people focusing on whether it's deportations, whether it's this whole attack on DEI or whatever it is, um, to come up with some kind of action plan and some things to prevent that from happening. Hopefully that answers your question.
Here we have, Brother Bashir has a question.
Yes. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum
Walaikum assalam.
Thank you again for your presentation and for the work you've done. I was just reflecting, on the activism in the history of this community of African American Muslims. And a lot of times, or quite often, we think of activists as protests, movements, people out in the street, bringing issues to the forefront. And looking at the history of the community of African American Muslims that came up under the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and Imam Muhammad, I think we were activists in the respect that those brothers out in the street that were selling the Muhammad Speaks newspaper were activists in bringing issues that were prominent in that paper because they were dealing with social issues that were affecting not only the African American community, but the broader American community. And I think we need to keep that in perspective in our history of being activists. And when I reflect too upon Imam Muhammad's leadership, and you may correct me on this, but he wasn't very, let's say, a great proponent of marches per se. And but although he was an activist,
Mhm.
I would say he was an activism in itself is to change people's minds, to bring forth an issue that needs to be changed. And you have to change people's minds to do that in many respects. Because a lot says argue with them, but argue with them the most intelligent way. So the protest is an argument. Um, the only march I remember as a community we made was against the probate court, which Muslims came from all over the country in that particular march. Um, so and even with the Palestinian situation, I know the Imam early, and it may have changed his position, but early in his mission, and he had went to Palestine and seen that issue. Uh, he thought that they may have wanted to use the civil rights approach to their situation, because a lot of times when you have people out, and sometimes these marches are compromised by people who are not they're there. They may not understand, or uh, they cause issues that disrupt what the message is is trying to be portrayed. So I just want to make those comments in
Yeah.
relationship to what we're discussing.
Yeah, there's at least two comments I want to make about that. One of the things that it's easy to get the impression that I was mainly talking about marches, right? Or protests, because that's what the articles often are in my book or whatever the issues are um, talked about. And usually I try to pull together speakers and different people that were talking about a particular issue. So as usually the protest was used as a way of promoting this, whatever this was, fighting for community control of the police or whatever. The things that you don't see, which I do write about in my book also, is the very long campaign of other stuff happening. Community control of the police was a great example. I mean, there were um, press conferences at the city hall. There were different groups doing all kinds of different things. Um, so every protest that I might have talked about was really like the iceberg, top of the iceberg of the movement that people finally saw, but they didn't see all the organizing, all the other activities that went on below that. Um, the other thing I would say is that to your first point, that I think people need to read my last book, The Muslim American Fight for Social Justice from Civil Rights to Black Lives Matter, because my whole point in that book was that the people, uh, that the Nation of Islam and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and absolutely Imam Muhyiddin Muhammad were the first examples of American Muslims fighting for social justice and everything that went on in the Nation of Islam and bringing dignity and equality and justice to the black community. That's absolutely activism. So I talked about that a lot in my last book, so that's probably why I didn't bring it up now. But the last thing I just wanted to say, you were talking about Imam W. Muhammad. I think, like you said, maybe he wasn't that big on marches or whatever, but I think his whole approach to, you know, what Al-Islam was and educating people and communicating that, and also being in dialogue with not only, other Muslim communities in this country, but, also around the world and also other religions. Um, that's a big part of being an activist. And, that even the stuff that he would say that, and you might correct me on this, but I mean, he encouraged people to get involved in the political system. It was like, well, this is our country, even though, people don't think it is. And we need to, fight to keep it back or take it back. So I would absolutely put all that under the activist umbrella. I mean, sometimes we think, oh, it's an activist, it's mainly people who protest. Well, activists do lots of different things.
I would like to say this too, Bill, in relation and he. You hear me?
Yeah.
Because I had a call come through. Okay. Um, he protested many of the injustices here in America. So he wasn't on the sideline. He wasn't going along to get along, but he
He did
argued.
Palestine too.
Yeah, very much so. Because when he went to Palestine and
Yep.
when he went there, he said they understand my position. So they understood his position because he was giving a very, as the Quran say, argue with them with most intelligent argument and a moral base. And he was speaking to people. All people are not immoral. There are many people that are moral. So he understood this. He wasn't calling all of the other people that were other than Muslims infidels or devils. So I think the approach that he made, and he argued against all of those injustices, and because of the stance that he made, the rational, balanced stance that he made, the people in leadership saw this, understood the position he was taking, and saw a person that they could work with, or a
Mhm.
community of people that they could work with, to address these many problems that we have. And I think that's something, even as activists,
Mhm.
sometimes we may be activists and we'll be in such a strong position that everybody's wrong and I'm right kind of situation. And we need that balanced approach in all of these issues that we're dealing with. Thank you.
Yep. Absolutely agree. He was a great communicator, and I remember reading a lot of his lectures and hutbas, and that's one of the things that I never saw him in person other than on video or whatever, but that's one of the things that attracted me to the Al-Islam community. This rational argument, accepting, the strong Muslim faith, but, promoting education and knowledge and science and all of those things and explaining it in a very clear, rational approach. Very attractive. I just wish more people would read it.
Brother Bill, we want to thank you for your presentation. We're on our 2 o'clock hours.
Yep.
It was very thorough and very informational, and I really appreciate you stepping in and being able to present to us today.
Mm.
So we can close out with Surah Asa. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Wal as inna lisana lafikus ladina hum yuwaswisu wa tawasa bil haq wa tawasa bis sabr. And
Amin.
thank you
Thanks so
again.
much for letting me
Yes, it was
talk
a
to another.
pleasure.
I really appreciate it.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank
All
you.
right.
That's all.
Thank you, Brother Bill.
Bye.